It wasn't a fall. I'll repeat that as many times as necessary to get them to sign off on my medical leave, but I'm not going to lie about how I broke 3 ribs in my collarbone. I was tracking an illegal camper, one Arthur Vance. I found his abandoned camp on the North Ridge, mile 8. The food was untouched, but his gear had been scattered with unnecessary violence. There were no tooth marks on the cans, just metal crushed by brute pressure. At 4:40 p.m., the temperature dropped sharply. The forest settled into that absolute silence that raises the hair on your neck. No birds, no wind in the canopy. Then came the smell. Stale musk, old sweat, and something metallic like dried blood. I turned to head back toward the main trail, and that's when it happened. There was no warning. It came out of the brush to my right. I didn't see it run. I only felt the displacement of air a second before impact. It was like being hit by a vehicle at low speed. I was thrown 3 meters backward, my back slamming into the trunk of a red cedar. The air left my lungs instantly. Before I could hit the ground or reach my weapon, a hand, or whatever that limb was, pinned me against the bark. It wasn't a bear's paw. I felt the pressure of 5 points of grip on my tactical vest, closing with hydraulic force. The entity was there, standing on 2 legs, blocking out all the light. I didn't see its face. It was backlit and far too close, but I felt the heat radiating from its body. It was an industrial furnace wrapped in coarse, wire-hard hair. I heard my own ribs crack. The pain was blinding. It could have torn my head off. It had the leverage, the mass, the strength. But it didn't. It leaned in and released a hot breath across my neck, a deep, vibrating growl that resonated inside my own rib cage. It wasn't hunger. It was authority. It was telling me I had crossed a line. Then, suddenly, the pressure was gone. I dropped to my knees, coughing, gasping desperately for air. When I managed to look up with my flashlight, I only saw the movement of high branches about 20 meters away, closing behind it. It moved in silence, despite weighing well over 200 kilos. It took me 4 hours to drag myself to the road. In the report, I wrote that I was attacked by a rutting elk. It's the only explanation they'll accept for blunt chest trauma without bite marks. But elk don't have hands, and they don't spare your life to teach you a lesson. That area isn't ours. We're only allowed in until they decide we're no longer welcome. I've been bow hunting elk on the Olympic Peninsula for 20 years. I know the difference between the sound of a squirrel and a black bear. What happened that afternoon isn't in any tracking manual. I was secured in my tree stand about 5 meters off the ground on an old Douglas fir. Visibility was fading. I was about to climb down and head back to the truck when what we call the Oz effect occurred. The forest went silent. The jays, the squirrels, even the wind, all of it stopped at once. Then I heard the footsteps. They came from my blind side, behind the tree. Slow, deliberate, heavy. It wasn't the rhythmic gait of a quadruped. It was bipedal. Something was walking on 2 feet, carefully distributing immense weight to avoid making excessive noise, but the dry branches on the ground still gave way under the pressure. I drew my bow, assuming it was another hunter encroaching on my area, ready to shout at him. But the smell stopped me. A rising draft of air carried an acrid stench, like damp clothes left to rot in a basement, mixed with concentrated urine. The presence stopped directly beneath my platform. I froze, holding my breath. My boots were 5 meters up. From the acoustics, the source of the breathing I heard, a deep, wet, nasal sound, wasn't coming from ground level. It was coming from about 2 meters up. Whatever was down there was tall enough that its head was dangerously close to the base of my stand. I felt a vibration through the trunk of the tree. It didn't strike it, it pushed it. A single, firm, controlled shove that made a 70-year-old fir sway and rattled my metal seat. It wasn't an attack, it was a test. It was measuring my stability. Then I heard a guttural sound, a click made with tongue and palate, almost electronic, very soft. It stayed there below me for 10 endless minutes. I had a carbon fiber arrow with a broadhead ready, but primal fear paralyzed me. I knew that if I leaned out to take a shot, I'd be exposing my torso within its reach. Eventually, the footsteps moved off into the thick timber, snapping branches at chest height without crouching. I didn't climb down until the sun came up the next morning. I urinated in my own pants because I didn't dare move. I left my gear there, the compound bow, the pack, the rangefinder. I've never returned to that management unit. I've hunted predators my entire life, but that night, I understood that in those woods, we are the prey. We found Corin Reeve at 2:15 a.m., curled up beneath a rock overhang in the Ironwood ravine. He wasn't injured, but he was catatonic. He still had his backpack on and a hunting knife clenched in his hand, his knuckles white from gripping it too hard. When my second-in-command, Harlan, approached to check his vitals, Reeve didn't say thank you or ask about his family. He stared at us with wide, unfocused eyes and whispered, "It stopped moving when you turned the lights on." We didn't understand what he meant until we began the extraction. Protocol requires constant noise to scare off bears. We shouted, snapped branches, talked over the radio, but about 20 minutes into the hike, we noticed the forest wasn't responding. There were no normal echoes. The atmosphere felt dense, heavy, like the air before an electrical storm. At 2:40 a.m., Harlan, who was bringing up the rear, called for a full stop. "Someone is walking with us," he said over the intercom. We switched off our flashlights and used thermal night vision. Nothing, just cold trees. But the smell was there, a sharp stench like ammonia and dirty hair. We resumed moving. 5 minutes later, a pine cone struck Harlan's helmet. It didn't fall from a tree, it was thrown horizontally with enough force to make his ears ring. When we turned, we'd heard a low growl, a deep chest vibration I felt through the soles of my boots. We weren't being hunted, we were being guided. Every time we tried to veer toward the eastern trail, we heard violent cracking sounds, thick branches breaking in that direction, forcing us to correct our course south, away from the dense zone. The creature was denying us access to that part of the forest. In a clearing, under the moonlight, I saw the silhouette. It stood motionless between two cedars, about 30 meters away. It wasn't a bear standing upright. The proportion of the shoulders to the head was immense, triangular. There was no visible neck. It stayed there, watching us pass, completely still, blending with the vertical shadows of the trunks. I estimate it stood no less than 2 meters 40. When we finally crossed the river line and reached the vehicles, we heard one last sound from the darkness. 3 sharp strikes of wood against wood, rhythmic and loud. A closing warning. I recommend suspending nighttime searches in the Ironwood sector. We are not equipped to deal with something that knows the terrain better than we do. Reeve was lucky. Whatever lives there only wanted us gone. I have a wooden cabin on the north boundary. I use it for fence maintenance. There's no electricity, only propane lamps. I know the local wildlife. I've had bears on the porch and cougars on the roof. I know how they sound. At 1:15 a.m., something climbed the 3 steps to the porch. The wood is old and it creaks, but this was different. It wasn't the shuffling weight of a bear or the light trot of a predator. It was 2 heavy impacts, evenly spaced. Whatever it was distributing its weight on 2 feet. The entire structure of the cabin groaned under the load. I shut off the lamp immediately. I sat in the dark, my .30-06 rifle across my knees on the cot. The thing walked across the porch decking and stopped in front of the only window, which was covered by a thick fabric curtain. It didn't try to open the door or turn the knob. That kind of intelligence is a myth. It did what a curious animal would do: investigate the smell and the heat. I heard breathing right against the wallboards. It was wet, congested, as if there were fluid in its lungs or an unusually wide nasal passage. Then something blocked what little moonlight was leaking through the edges of the curtain. A massive shadow filled the entire frame. For a few seconds, the creature pressed its face or chest against the glass. The pane creaked slightly under the pressure. Then the moonlight shifted, and I could see a strip of detail through a gap where the curtain didn't quite close. I didn't see a monster. I saw dark skin, like old leather, covered with sparse, coarse hair, a dirty brown color, full of pine needles and grime. It wasn't uniform fur like a teddy bear's. It was matted and greasy. I could see part of a shoulder, dense muscle, trembling slightly with each breath. What struck me most was the smell that seeped through the seams of the old window. It wasn't just a bad odor. It smelled of stale urine and animal glands, powerful and acrid. The creature tapped the glass with its knuckles, an awkward gesture, testing the resistance. It wasn't an aggressive strike, more exploratory. When it realized the glass was solid and wouldn't give, it let out a frustrated huff, a deep, vibrating sound I felt in my stomach, and lost interest. It turned away. I heard its weight shift, the porch beams creaking again, and it went down the steps heavily into the snow. I waited until dawn to go outside. On the exterior glass, there was a smear of facial grease at a height of 2 meters and 10 centimeters. There was frozen condensation from its breath. On the ground, the snow was churned up with no clear tracks, but the porch railing was splintered, as if something very wide had brushed past without properly judging its own size. I'm not reporting it to local police because there was no theft or attack, but I've boarded up the windows with plywood. Whatever was there was not human. I'm a practical man. I go into the forest to fish and disconnect, not to look for scary stories. But what happened on Saturday made me pack up camp at 4 in the morning and drive down to town with my high beams on. I had tied a blue tarp between 2 fir trees to cover my firewood in case it rained. I'm tall, 1.88 meters, and I tied that line stretching my arms as high as I could. The rope was taut more than 2 meters off the ground, a height I can walk under without brushing my head. At 2:30, the sound woke me. It wasn't the chaotic noise of a bear tearing things apart. It was footsteps, slow, rhythmic, heavy. I stayed still in my sleeping bag. The campfire was down to red embers, but they cast a faint glow close to the ground. I looked out through the mesh of the tent. I saw 2 legs pass less than 3 meters from me. They were thick, covered in dark hair and dried mud. What froze my blood wasn't the hair, but watching how the feet sunk into the soft earth. The ground gave under its weight with a dense, wet sound that I felt in my chest. The figure walked straight toward where I had the tarp. I expected it to stop or have to duck deeply to get through. It didn't. The tarp rope struck it directly across the upper chest, near the collarbone. I heard the sound of the nylon stretching and scraping against something rough, like a wire brush. The tarp shook violently, dumping the collected water. The thing stopped dead. It didn't growl, it didn't startle. It simply raised a hand, an enormous, dark hand with long fingers, and lifted the rope with absurd delicacy to finish passing underneath without breaking it. It did it with the calm of a human opening a curtain. The smell reached my tent a few seconds later, a heavy mix of strong musk, stale sweat, and wet earth. It stood there for a moment with its back to me, facing the river. Its silhouette completely blocked the view of the trees beyond. It was a wall of muscle. Then it kept walking. Its steps faded into the darkness of the trail. No running, no looking back. When morning came, I went to check the rope. It was intact, but there was a smear of grease or oil where it had made contact. In the mud, the prints were smooth, human-like, but flat and wide, about 40 centimeters long. I won't be going back to that area. That thing is too big to be out there, and far too calm to be a wild animal. I had been tracking a black-tailed deer for 3 hours. The wind was in my favor, blowing straight into my face, which is ideal for approaching without being scented. The forest was calm, nothing out of the ordinary for an autumn afternoon. I stopped near a stand of oaks to scan the area with my binoculars, looking for movement in the undergrowth. About 100 meters out, I saw something dark crouched beside a fallen log. My first reaction was frustration. Because of the dark brown color and the size, I thought it was another hunter wearing a ghillie-style camouflage suit who had wandered into my quadrant without notifying anyone. I lowered the binoculars and prepared to signal him, but something stopped me. The figure was digging in the ground with its hands. It wasn't using tools, it was using its fingers. Through the lenses, I watched it tear a chunk of rotting bark from the log with absurd ease. A bear would use claws and snout. This thing used its fingers, gripping and pulling with a very human wrist motion. Then it stood up. It didn't rise like a bear rocking back to find balance. This thing simply straightened its legs and was upright. It was huge. I estimate its head easily cleared 2 meters, towering above the manzanita shrubs around it. I saw it in profile. It had a hunched posture with its head pitched forward. The fur wasn't uniform. On the shoulders it was dense and dark, but along the side it was thinner, revealing grayish, taut skin stretched over the ribs. It took 3 steps to the left. What turned my stomach was the way it lifted its feet. It didn't drag them or stomp heavily. It raised the knee very high and placed the foot on the ground with total control, as if it were walking on glass and didn't want to make a sound. It stopped, turned its head, and looked in my general direction. I don't think it saw me. I was well concealed and perfectly still, but it froze for about 10 seconds, scenting the air. At that moment, with the rifle in my hands, I felt an absolute certainty. I couldn't shoot. Not because it was illegal, but because my instincts were screaming that if I missed or only wounded it, that thing would cover the 100 meters between us before I could work the bolt. The animal turned away and moved uphill, slipping through the brush with an agility that doesn't match its body mass. It didn't snap a single branch. I waited a full 5 minutes without moving. Then I backed out the way I came, walking backward until I reached the forest road. I'm not going to report this as a wildlife sighting because I don't have photos and I don't want to be the county joke, but I'm putting it on record here. There is something on the north slope that walks like us, but it is not one of us. I'm not going to embellish this. What I reported over the radio at 06:45 in the morning was not a caffeine-deprived mistake. I've spent 20 years in this forest. I know how to tell a brown bear from a rotting log. I went down to the bend in the river to check whether the rains had undercut the angler's trail. The fog was low, covering the water up to waist height. Everything was unnervingly quiet. There were no herons, no usual splashing of trout. At about 80 meters on the opposite bank, I saw something emerge from the tree line and enter the water. At first, because of the dark brown color and massive shape, I thought it was a large elk drinking. Then, the silhouette straightened. Whatever it was stood up on two legs in the middle of the current. The water in that section runs icy cold and strong enough to knock over a grown man without safety lines. It didn't react at all. It remained motionless, with the water breaking against its thighs, staring into the current as if waiting for something. Through my rifle scope, I could make out details that make no biological sense for the local wildlife. I didn't see its face, but I saw its right arm. It was covered in wet hair, plastered to the skin, revealing musculature in the forearm and bicep that looked like tensioned rope under canvas. The hand hung near the knee. It was long, with thick, dark fingers that curled slightly. The most disturbing part came when it decided to cross. It didn't swim, it walked against the current. Each step was slow and mechanical. It lifted its leg exaggeratedly high to overcome the resistance of the water and planted it on the rocky bottom with absolute certainty. A bear walking on two legs wobbles, searches for balance. This thing advanced with the fluidity of heavy machinery. When it reached the middle of the river, it stopped and turned its head slightly toward my position. I don't think it saw me through the brush, but I felt like it was sampling the air. I stayed frozen, controlling my breathing so I wouldn't fog the scope. Seconds later, it quickened its pace, climbed the muddy embankment on the far side, a slope of nearly 60 degrees, using its hands only once to push itself up. It vanished into the undergrowth without snapping a single branch. I request a route reassignment for maintenance crews. We can't send anyone alone to that bank while that thing continues to claim the territory. It isn't aggressive, but it is dominant, and it's far too large to confront. I went up to assess the fir tree that fell during Monday's storm. It's an old tree with a trunk about 1.5 meters in diameter. To put the problem into perspective, the trunk reaches the middle of my chest. To cross it, I have to place both hands on it, lift my torso, and swing my legs over while sitting on the bark. It's a significant physical barrier. At 16:20, while I was measuring the cut for the chainsaw, I noticed movement coming down the eastern slope. At first, I thought it was an elk because of the dark brown color, but then I saw it was walking on two legs. It didn't stagger. It came down the incline with complete stability. I stayed still beside the root ball of the fallen tree. The figure was heading toward the same trunk, about 30 meters below my position. I got a clear look at it. It had a massive build, but what stood out was the neck. It was thick and powerful, visibly muscular, connecting the head to the shoulders in a smooth slope. It turned its head side to side fluidly, scanning the forest as it walked. I waited for it to reach the tree, assuming it would have to climb over it or go around, like any person or animal of that size would. It did neither. When it reached the trunk, again, an obstacle that comes up to my chest, it didn't even break its walking rhythm. It lifted its right leg. The knee rose with an impressive mechanical ease, clearing the height of the bark without touching it. It planted the foot on the other side and simply brought the rest of its body through. The movement was fluid, silent. It crossed a barrier of 1.5 meters as if it were a 20-centimeter step. It stopped briefly after crossing. It turned that wide neck in my direction. The distance was safe, but I felt like it was evaluating me. There was no aggression, just absolute confidence in its physical capability. It made a dry sound in its throat and continued walking toward the river. I'm not going to speculate about what species it is. I'm only reporting what I saw. Something that weighs twice as much as I do and has hip mobility that is not human. I recommend sending the cleanup crew in groups. never alone. It was 5:45 p.m. when I finished marking the last stake in the northwest quadrant. With the light dropping fast, I decided to camp right there instead of hiking the 4 miles back to the truck. I'm a field man and have spent years working alone in dense forest. I know the difference between the sound of a bear, an elk, and the wind. What happened that night doesn't fit into any standard zoological category. At 8:30 p.m., the forest shut down. It wasn't gradual, it was like someone cut a cable. Crickets, wind and the fir tops, the distant flow of the creek, everything stopped within seconds. That kind of silent zone usually indicates a top predator, but a cougar doesn't silence an entire valley. I lit my small gas stove to heat some coffee. The smell of propane mixed suddenly with another odor, something organic and damp, like wet clothes left in a closed basement with a faint metallic edge. At 9:15 p.m., I heard the first footstep. It came from about 40 meters uphill. Heavy, deliberate. Whatever was there was walking on 2 legs. The pace was too slow for a human moving at night without a headlamp and far too heavy for an average man. From the vibration through the ground, I estimated the weight at well over 200 kilos. I didn't call out. I knew it wasn't a lost hiker. I switched off my headlamp so I wouldn't give away my exact position and stayed still beside the tent, one hand on the bear spray. It didn't come down into the camp. It began to circle me. For 3 hours, it kept a precise distance of about 30 meters, tracing a semicircle along the edge of the darkness. It didn't step on branches by accident. It snapped them so I would hear. It was herding behavior, territorial. It was telling me, I know exactly where you are. At 2 a.m., the most unsettling thing happened. From the brush, I heard a low, vibrating, guttural sound that wasn't a roar. It was imitation. The thing tried to reproduce the metallic sound of my stove lighting, a rough click hiss, followed by a strong nasal exhale. It was studying me. I didn't sleep. I stayed seated against a tree until the gray light of dawn, around 6:30, broke the tension. While breaking camp, I looked for evidence. The ground was a thick mat of dry pine needles, impossible for clear tracks. But about 20 meters from my tent, I found something else. 3 young fir trees, roughly 10 centimeters in diameter, had been bent and woven together at a height of about 2.5 meters, forming a crude barrier across my exit route. They weren't wind damaged. They had been manipulated with the level of strength and manual control no bear has. I walked down to the truck without looking back. There was no pursuit, just that persistent pressure at the back of my neck until I started the engine. That area of forest isn't haunted, and there are no movie monsters there. There is something biological, intelligent, and highly territorial living along those ridges, and we are the intruders. I haven't accepted any jobs that require overnight stays alone in the northern sector since. I am a civilian camper with enough experience to travel alone and follow the basic rules of remote areas in the interior of British Columbia. I carry no weapons, I don't hunt, and I usually stay several days in the same place when the terrain allows it. The area where this occurred was approved for dispersed camping and had no formal history of incidents. The first night was normal. The second began to feel different, though I couldn't say exactly when the change happened. The forest was still there, but it wasn't functioning properly. Sounds appeared and cut out without any clear pattern. It wasn't calm. It was as if something interrupted the natural rhythm and then stepped away. Near the camp, a persistent smell appeared. It wasn't strong, but it was constant. It wasn't garbage or a dead animal. I associated it with wet hair mixed with soil and resin. I checked my food, pack, and hanging system. Everything was sealed and elevated as park rules require. Later, the movement began. Not hurried footsteps, but slow shifts, always just beyond the direct reach of my headlamp. The impression wasn't of a lost animal, but of something maintaining distance deliberately. When I moved, the sound stopped. When I stayed still, it returned from a different angle. At one point, I distinguished a partial figure among the trees. It wasn't a complete sighting. It was a dark mass, taller than it was wide, with defined shoulders and a generally humanoid structure, though without a clearly human posture. It wasn't fully upright or hunched. It seemed to adapt itself to the terrain. Its body didn't reflect the light. It absorbed the beam in an unusual way. What stood out most was the way it moved. There was no hurry or sudden flight. The weight shifted with precision as if it knew the ground well. I heard a single, isolated knock against a trunk, followed by prolonged silence. I didn't interpret it as an attack, but as a minimal warning. Something was there and had no intention of coming closer. The dominant feeling wasn't fear, but constant pressure, the certainty of being observed with attention. I reduced the fire and avoided unnecessary movement. The figure never crossed the edge of the clearing. It stayed at the boundary, controlling the distance. I remained inside the tent until morning. The smell faded during the night, and with daylight, the forest returned to normal activity. I found no clear tracks. The ground was covered in wet leaves and branches. Any marks were impossible to interpret. I reported the episode at the end of my stay, as regulations require. I later learned that other similar reports had been received, which led to an administrative review and temporary restrictions in the area. I still camp, but I choose different places now, not because I believe I was in danger, but because I learned that some places don't need you to drive you away to make it clear they don't expect you to stay. I have been a ranger in the Interior District of British Columbia since 2014. I am recording an incident that occurred during a routine patrol of dispersed campsites. That night, the forest displayed anomalous behavior. It was not complete silence, but a discontinuity, the absence of insects and birds in stretches where they normally remain active. I stopped the vehicle at the access point near Kettlehook Creek and continued on foot along a secondary trail, using low illumination to avoid disturbing wildlife. A short distance in, I detected a persistent organic odor that was difficult to classify. It did not correspond to decay or ordinary dampness. It was heavier, similar to wet hair mixed with freshly disturbed soil. I stopped and marked the location for an internal report. From the closed forest along one side of the trail, I heard dry, deliberate knocks, spaced apart and lacking any erratic pattern. I did not respond or advance. I remained still. The sound occurred again farther ahead, as if something were moving while maintaining a lateral distance. There was no running, no random snapping of branches. The impression was of controlled accompaniment, not flight. The wind shifted and the odor briefly intensified. My reaction was physical, tightness in the chest and restrained breathing. I initiated a slow withdrawal as outlined in procedures for unclassified encounters with large wildlife. I did not run. At one point, between the trees, I perceived a dark, motionless mass positioned at a height incompatible with that of a deer or a black bear in a normal stance. When I directed my flashlight toward it, there was no eyeshine and no sudden reaction, only a gradual redistribution of weight, as if something ceased leaning against the ground. Back at the vehicle, I conducted a wider inspection using full light. The ground was covered in damp leaf litter. No clear tracks or usable markings were identified. The event was reported by radio as an unclassified interaction with large wildlife. No immediate search was initiated due to the absence of verifiable indicators. In the days that followed, there were voluntary campsite abandonments, complaints of deliberate nighttime sounds, and a second report of a strong odor along the same corridor. Given the repeated patterns and the lack of conclusive evidence, I recommended a temporary closure of the northern sector, a measure approved on preventive safety grounds. I do not claim to have identified a specific species. I do, however, record behavior that was intentional, territorial, and consistent. The area remains restricted during nighttime hours, not as a response to fear, but as the result of a prudent assessment. I've been crossing the interior of Idaho since the late 1990s. What I experienced at Broken Crag Pass doesn't belong to any of those categories, and it's the sole reason I stopped traveling alone. I set up my lightweight tent on a granite ledge off the main trail to avoid the north wind. It was 7:40 p.m. when I finished securing my food in the bear-proof container, placing it the regulation 100 meters from camp. The forest was calm, carrying that dense stillness typical of late autumn. At 2:15 a.m., I woke up abruptly. There was no noise, only a complete absence of it. The wind had stopped, and the nocturnal insects were utterly silent. The air inside the tent felt heavy, charged. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't the rot people describe on internet forums. It was subtler, deeply turned wet earth mixed with sour musk, like a territorial animal, with a metallic note underneath, similar to copper. I heard a footstep. Crunch. The sound came from the gravel about 5 meters from my head. It was a bipedal step carrying immense weight. To make that kind of compacted granite crack, I estimated the subject would have to weigh close to 300 kilos. What was unsettling was the control. It wasn't dragging its feet. Each step was lifted and placed with deliberate precision. I froze inside my sleeping bag, one hand gripping the pepper spray. The silhouette blocked the moonlight through the tent wall. It was massive, filling the entire eastern side. What followed lasted perhaps 2 minutes, but it felt much longer. Something touched the tent. It wasn't a swipe or a strike. A hand, or something with the dexterity of a hand, pressed against the nylon fabric from outside, directly over my chest. I could see the outline of the pressure, a broad palm, far larger than a human's without prominent claws. It pressed gently, testing the resistance of the material, like someone checking a piece of fruit for ripeness. I felt a low vibration, a guttural purr that resonated through my sternum. It wasn't aggressive, it was dominant curiosity. It was inspecting what it had found. Then it withdrew. I heard 3 fast, heavy steps moving back into the brush, followed by a sharp whistle, bird-like in tone, but backed by impossible lung capacity. At dawn, around 6:45, I stepped out with my knife in hand. There were no tracks on the hard rock. I went to check my food container. The polycarbonate canister, designed to withstand grizzly bear bites, wasn't where I had left it. I found it 50 meters away, placed, not thrown, on top of a flat stump. The container was closed. There were no teeth marks or scratches. It was, however, coated in a clear, viscous slime. The most unsettling part was that it had been set upside down, balanced perfectly in a way that required precise manual manipulation. I packed my gear in 10 minutes and descended the mountain without stopping. I didn't leave out of fear of being eaten, but out of the certainty that I had been observed, assessed, and spared by something that considers that forest its private property. I've never returned to Broken Crag. At 2:30 p.m., I located an illegal structure 2 kilometers off the main trail in a dense hemlock forest. It was not a conventional hunting blind. It was a conical shelter built by interweaving living saplings. The branches had not been cut with a knife. They had been twisted and braided together with immense tensile force to form a solid wall. Following unauthorized structures protocol, I began documenting the site. The interior was clean, with no trash or shell casings, but the ground was compacted and carried a strong odor of damp musk and something metallic, similar to oxidized blood. When I attempted to cut one of the braided branches to free a young tree, the environment reacted. I did not hear footsteps approaching. I only heard a violent exhalation, a blast of pressurized air directly behind my right ear. The proximity indicated the subject had been standing motionless, blended with the tree bark, less than a meter from me while I was working. As I turned, my peripheral vision caught a vertical mass of dark brown color. I had no time to raise my hands. The attacker struck me in the chest with the back of its hand. It was not a closed fist punch, it was a sweeping slap, similar to how a human swats a fly, but delivered with disproportionate muscle mass. The force lifted my feet off the ground and threw me backward approximately 3 meters. My back struck the trunk of a Douglas fir, causing a concussion and knocking the air out of me. I fell into the moss, stunned. As I struggled to breathe and reach for my radio, I saw the attacker. It stood beside the structure I had attempted to dismantle. It was over 2 meters 10 centimeters tall. Its shoulder width blocked the light filtering through the trees. It did not roar. It looked down at me with an expression of pure territorial hostility. Its chest rose and fell with slow, audible breaths. What it did next was the most disturbing part. It did not attack again. It crouched, picked up the branch I had started to cut, and with a precise, controlled motion of its thick, dark fingers, returned it to its original position, repairing the woven structure I had damaged. Then it stomped the ground with its right foot, a dull impact that vibrated the humus beneath my body, and pointed downslope toward the valley exit. I understood the command. I stood up, ignoring the sharp pain in my collarbone, and withdrew without turning my back until visual contact was broken. This was not an encounter with a bear defending cubs. It was an interaction with a bipedal creature of superior strength defending a deliberate construction. I request that the Carbon River Drainage Zone be designated a biological hazard zone and that solo patrols be prohibited. My name is Coulter Brannigan. I have been guiding fly fishing trips on the Yellowstone River system since 2008. It was 6:45 p.m. I had dropped my clients off at the boat ramp and decided to walk back upstream along the west bank to check a deep pool that usually holds large trout this time of year. When I reached the bend, I noticed an anomaly in the current. About 6 meters from shore, someone had built a submerged structure. It was a V-shaped weir made of river granite stones. These rocks weigh between 40 and 60 kilos. Moving them underwater, fighting the current, and locking them into place with that level of precision to create an artificial slack pool requires incredible strength. As I studied the structure, the wind shifted. A dense odor reached me, a mix of stagnant dampness, strong musk, and something sulfur-like. It wasn't the smell of a dead animal, it was the smell of a dirty, living one. I looked toward the opposite bank, about 30 meters away. Among the willows, a figure was crouched at the waterline. At first, because of the dark brown color, I thought it was an elk drinking. Then it stood up. The movement was vertical and controlled. It didn't use its forelimbs to push itself up, it simply extended its legs. It stood comfortably over 2 meters tall. Its body was covered in dark, matted hair, packed with dried mud and plant debris that broke up its outline, making it nearly invisible against the trees behind it. I saw it raise its right arm. It was holding a net I had lost the week before. The creature was examining it, It rotated the net in its hands, huge hands, with thick, dexterous fingers, testing the rubber mesh, stretching it gently to see how much it would give. It showed no aggression. It was fascinated by the tool. It made a low sound, a kind of vibrating murmur that I could feel in my chest despite the noise of the river. It set the net down carefully, not tossing it. Then it lifted its head and looked directly at me. The distance and the fading light obscured its facial details, but the posture was unmistakable. It stood motionless, arms hanging at its sides, watching me with a cold, calculating curiosity. There was no fear in its body language, only a calm assessment of my size and position. I understood then that the stone weir in the river was his. It was trap fishing, and I had wandered into his work zone. I backed away slowly, step by step, until the bend in the river broke the line of sight. I walked 3 kilometers back to my truck without turning on my flashlight, stopping every 100 meters to listen. I have not returned to that stretch of the Yellowstone alone. The next day, I floated past in the raft, staying in the center of the river and looking toward the bank. My net was gone. The stone weir was still there, functioning perfectly, catching fish for someone who knows exactly how to survive without being seen. I operated in the northern section of the Yellowstone River. I know this stretch. It's been my livelihood for 12 years, but what I encountered last Tuesday has changed my mind. It was close to 7 in the evening. The sun was already low, and the shadows of the cottonwoods lay across the water. I had gone down alone to the bank to check a pool where my clients had lost several large trout the previous week. When I reached the bend, I saw something strange in the water. In a shallow section, someone had arranged a circle of river stones. It wasn't a child's game. The rocks were massive, rounded boulders I couldn't lift with both hands without wrecking my back. They were stacked into a small enclosed corral, and inside it, the water was calm. I stepped closer. There were 5 or 6 live trout trapped inside, swimming in slow circles. Someone had caught them and was keeping them there for later. Then the smell reached me. It was strong and rancid, like dirty hair and spoiled meat mixed with river mud. My stomach turned. I heard a soft splash behind a cluster of willow bushes about 10 meters away. A dark figure emerged. At first, because of its size, my mind tried to see a grizzly bear standing on 2 legs, but bears don't have shoulders that wide and squared, and they don't move with that kind of confidence. It was enormous. Its body was covered in dark hair, slicked flat by the water. It made no sound as it stepped onto the stones along the bank. It moved with a frightening smoothness, controlling every muscle without the clumsiness of a heavy animal. It crouched beside the stone corral, ignoring my presence at first. It plunged a huge hand into the water with incredible speed and pulled out one of the trout. It held it firmly, without effort, and bit cleanly just behind the head, killing it instantly. That was when it stopped. With the fish in his hand, it turned its head and looked at me. We were close. I could see its face. The skin was dark and weathered, with deep-set eyes beneath a heavy brow. It didn't growl. It didn't bare its teeth. It simply stood there, chewing slowly, watching me with complete calm. There was no rage in that look. There was possession. It was telling me without words that those trout were his and that I didn't belong there. I felt a pressure in my chest, an ancient instinct screaming at me to turn around. I backed away step by step, never turning my back until I reached the road. It never stopped watching me, and it never let go of its dinner. I am not going back. You can't compete with something that builds its own traps out of 50-kilo stones and looks at you with that cold intelligence. That stretch of river already has an owner. At 5:45 p.m., I stepped onto the west bank to free the anchor, which had snagged beneath a submerged log. My clients were on shore, about 50 meters away. The water was waist-deep. The current in that section is deceptive and loud, masking any sound of approach. As I wrestled with the rope, I felt a vibration in the water. It wasn't the current, it was rhythmic impact waves striking my legs through the waders. Something heavy was running along the bank toward my position. I looked up. Less than 15 meters away, a dark mass burst from the line of willows and charged straight into the water. It didn't stop at the bank to look. It was a direct, aggressive rush. The thing ran along the riverbed, tearing through the current with its legs. The force of its movement threw up curtains of water 2 meters high. I didn't see its face, only a wall of wet muscle and matted hair coming at me at a terrifying speed. The smell hit me before the physical impact. It wasn't rot, it was a sharp, acidic chemical odor, like concentrated vinegar or formic acid, so strong it made my eyes water instantly. When it was 3 meters from me, it stopped dead. The sudden halt displaced so much water that the resulting wave slammed into the side of my raft, lifting it nearly half a meter. At the same time, the subject struck the surface of the river with both open hands. The sound was deafening, like a cannon blast. The explosion of water hit my chest and face with the force of a fire hose. I lost my balance and fell backward. My right shoulder slammed into the raft's gunwale as I went under. I felt the bones slip out of place with a nauseating crack. Underwater, dazed, I heard a guttural sound, a deep vibration that resonated in my skull. It wasn't a roar, it was an expulsive noise, like air being forced out of a pressurized tank. I surfaced, coughing, dragging myself toward the main current to get away. The creature was still there, standing with the water up to its thighs. It didn't pursue me, it simply grabbed my anchor line, a marine-grade nylon rope, and gave it a single sharp pull. I heard the metal of the anchor bend or break underwater. It released the raft, which drifted free with me hanging off the side. As the current carried me away, I saw the subject remain motionless in the middle of the river, claiming its space. It wasn't curiosity, it was a violent eviction. It used water and fear to drive me out of its fishing territory. The raft crashed 2 miles downstream. I require surgery on my shoulder. I will not guide in the canyon again.